Hello and welcome to Catholic Truths. Today we're going to go over the second half of my conversion story to the Catholic faith. My previous video ended with me being asked a question by a friend of mine when he realized I was trying to find where I should be at in my faith. And that question is, why would I choose a faith or a church that's less than 500 years old? And I thought, well, that's a good point. So I ended up boiling this down to being either the Lutheran Church, the Eastern Orthodox Church, or the Catholic Church. So upon looking into all of this, I quickly realized the Lutheran Church wasn't going to work, because one of the big issues I was having was I didn't want to be in a church that's just so easily split. And I realized early on the Lutheran Church had at least 3 different primary branches in it. They had split over some certain issues, one being more conservative, one being pretty liberal, and the other one seems to be more of a traditional viewpoint of what Luther actually found. And I'm sure there's actually other branches as well, but it just kind of went against the whole non-splitting issue. And then I looked into the Eastern Orthodox Church, and there's actually different versions of that church, but it's not because they split from each other. It's because they have this traditional view that the bishops are in charge of each of the different churches there, and there's no real higher authority over all of them other than God himself. And it didn't seem like a bad idea at first, and I started reading into it, and I realized, one, I was going to have to be rebaptized, which I didn't believe in that. Secondly, my friend told me he didn't think that I was a Christian. And I said, why? He's like, because you're not an Orthodox Christian. And I said, well, I'm still a Christian. My view is, if you follow Christ, you may be wrong, but you're still a Christian, depending on what your faith view is. But that doesn't make you not a Christian. So I was like, well, I don't think I can be a part of a church that's going to just sit there and criticize you being a Christian or not. See, I'll even look at a Mormon and say, well, they're a Christian, but depending on which definition of Christian you're looking at, depends on whether or not they're Christian or not. Christian being basically someone that follows Christ, and a lot of people do. But then you have the more modern view of the Trinitarian Christian, which is what most people think of, and therefore that's why you look at Mormonism as being kind of a cult and not actually Christian. But, you know, it's getting into very specific definitions there. I am still using my notes, so please forgive me for looking down. So the next thing I had left was looking at the Catholic Church. Now, I was raised to hate the Catholic Church. I had all these arguments against the Catholic Church, but I didn't even know what they believed in. I just had arguments against them. And I knew this was going to be rough on me because I didn't know anything about them. And after just a little bit of study, I learned out that most of the things that I knew about the Catholic Church was flat out lies or half-truths. You know, I'd never been properly taught what the Catholic Church actually taught. Simple concepts such as, original sin, I had no idea about. And then, I'd been told that Catholics worship saints and Mary and the Pope and stuff like that. Well, none of this is true. And I will cover each of these things in different videos in the future, so I'm not going to go into much detail. But just after, even a day of basic studying, I quickly learned most of what I knew was false. So, I started talking with my wife about this, and she was like, she wasn't raised to hate the Catholic Church, but she wasn't a Catholic by any means. And so she was like, okay, just do your research, and I'm a very analytical person. I always do my research, or at least I try to. And so I said, okay, so I start studying. And this is well over a year ago now. And, the more I start reading and watching videos, stuff like that, I was just like, my arguments don't have any grounding anymore. There's no standing for them. And so, the thing that was a big hit in the face for me was I came across the theologian Scott Hahn's conversion story on YouTube. And this man, I'm sure he probably has a little bit of notes like what I'm using when he does, but he was given a speech, and it was his conversion story. And then later on I read his book, Home Sweet Rome, or Rome Sweet Rome, I can't remember the exact title. And it was almost word for word. So I listened to it, and then I read it, a little differently there. But I listened to that, and then I let my wife listen to it as well, and we're like, wow. And one of the first things we both changed our minds on right away was the actual Eucharist. See, I was raised to see that the blood and body were symbolically in the Lord's Supper, but just after some simple, looking at Scripture, it's no literally. Excuse me. And again, I'll make a video over this too. This is one of the biggest divides between Catholics and Protestants. Is the actuality versus the symbolical view of Jesus being in the Eucharist. And for those of you that don't know, the Eucharist is also called the Holy Supper or the Lord's Supper and stuff. So that was our first big, change and stuff. And one thing I had to learn early on was I just needed to let go of what I held as a view. As I told you, the Church of Christ doesn't see tradition as an issue, but it really is, because if you can't just let it go, it's something that's drilled into you and stuff. So we started doing more studying and things like that, and it was about this time my wife and I, we discussed it, and she became a traveling nurse. And so we go around the country full-timing in an RV with our 6 kids, so you can only imagine. But the first place we went to was Pikeville, Kentucky. And after doing more research, I started going to the Catholic church that was there. And eventually I started talking with the priest there. His name is Father Richard Watson, and he is a wonderful man. Even if you don't agree with Catholicism at all, he's one of those men that you can talk to and you just feel better after talking to him. And, well, I explained to him what our situation was and that we were possibly interested in becoming Catholic. And, he wanted us to do a little bit more research and stuff. But, I'd said in my previous video that, this entire ordeal had 2 different signs from God. The first one was being just giant meteor that went flying through the sky when I asked for a sign. But the other one was a little more subtle, but also a smack in the face. I found out that Father Richard, he actually is a convert to Catholicism as well. And guess where he converted from? The Church of Christ. And so anything I had to ask him, he already knew the answer to. He had been through a very similar situation of, as I'd been through. And so he knew exactly where I was coming from. My wife, not as much. She wasn't a Church of Christ member. She was raised with her mom, and her mom did home worship for the most part. But, it was just this, oh my goodness. Pretty much one of the worst, most hated groups against Catholicism. And I actually met a priest that used to be that. So, so that was a big, eye-opener. And so we did more studying and stuff, and eventually, we talked with him and said, I think we do want to become Catholic. And he wanted to make sure we were sure about it. And we agreed with it. And normally, if you're not Catholic, you go through a process called RCIA. It's about a 1 to 2 year long class for adults to go through. Most of the time, this is done for the non-baptized. It can be done for the baptized, but we didn't have this time. We were only going to be there for a few months. We actually extended our stay to stay there longer. So he asked us a few questions and stuff. He deduced that we were probably more educated than most of the members of his parish in the Catholic faith. So, basic, simple things they couldn't even answer, we already knew the answers to. So he didn't have us go through RCIA. Instead, he just wanted us to be able to be a member of the community for a few months to get to understand and feel how the Catholic Mass went and stuff like that. And so we said, okay, that's great. And we wound up loving the church. As much as I told you we loved Granny White Church of Christ, we loved this church just as much. I mean, everyone, they didn't even know us, and they'd come up and just say, oh, it's good to see you back and stuff like that. It was awesome. We eventually did have a confirmation date set and then a baptism date set for our children. We couldn't have them on the same day because our my wife's aunt and uncle, which are the only Catholics, were going to be the godparents in our for our children, and they couldn't make it on Saturday evening for our confirmation. So they came Sunday morning, so we had those 2 on 2 different days. And I know some of you are raising your eyebrow about our children being baptized. I will make another video discussing this topic as well. But we faced some struggles, obviously, after this. The first theological study, the big one that we theological issue, not study. The big theological issue we had was a lot of the issues around Mary. But one thing we had to let go is the fact that there are a lot of ancient traditions and sacred traditions within the church. They're not biblical, but they're not unbiblical, if that makes sense. You know, these are things that have lasted, and you know, and that's where almost everything around Mary is centered. And I'll have a video discussing Mary and certain issues with that. But the other big issue is our parents. You know, my wife's parents, they're very okay with things. You know, they had some questions, but you know, they were very supportive. Even her grandfather even came and was taking pictures, and he's a humorous man. That man, he used to be a Lutheran pastor, I'm thinking, and then he became Buddhist, and now I think he goes to a Baptist church. He's fun to be around. We disagree with almost everything, but he's fun to be around. But my parents, my mom, you gotta remember, I'm from the South, like deep South. So I tell my mother that, you know, we've become Catholic, and she goes, "You weren't raised that way." You know, but that's about all she did. And every so often I'll do something and she'll think it's stupid. Like we were abstaining from meat on Fridays during Lent, and I was fasting from sugars, and she thought it was so stupid. She's seen my rosaries, and she thinks that's stupid. You know, it's just the Southern upbringing she has. My stepmom, I told her she didn't really care because she's got a Muslim daughter, so, you know, it wasn't that big of an issue for her. But my dad, he found out by accident when I was actually just having a historical argument from him. I had no intent of telling him about it just yet, but he deduced it somehow. He didn't talk to me for about 3 weeks at all. Finally, he opened up and started talking to me a little bit, just general chat. Now we talk like we used to, but if religion comes up, it's okay if it's generic religious talk. But if I say something like, "Oh, you should have seen what the kids did before Mass today," he just squints his eyes at me and doesn't talk, or skirts the issue. If I say, "Oh, you should have seen what the kids did at church today," he's like, "Oh, they do," you know. So we still have that little bit of a struggle going on still, and I'm trying to get that man to come to a Mass with me at some point. He almost did it one time, and then he realized, oh wait, no, that was kind of his viewpoint. Today we are still learning. We learn every day, you know, that's my view. We should always be learning things. So some issues I've been dealing with personally is more traditional views within the Catholic Church versus more modern views and stuff, and I will make a video on this too. But to boil it down, you know, I'm more of a conservative mind, so I'm starting to see, while the church isn't directly split, there are some factions within the church that where things are allowed or things aren't allowed and stuff, and they'll argue back and forth, and it's very interesting, and I will go over these in the future. But this is the end of my conversion story to the Catholic faith. As I said, we're still growing as a Catholic family. I'm teaching my kids catechism stuff and things like that. But I went over all this just to give y'all an idea of where I'm coming from when I do my videos. So thank you for watching, and God bless.